Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for another episode of our 8 Flags story. I am Isabel and I'm the new curator at the Amelia Island Museum of History. I'll be replacing Jared, who is in the process of training me. And during this transition, he has given me the honor of introducing this brand bag lunch presented by Regan Doran. After the green cross flag from Gregor MacGregor, the island is going to fall into the hands of a pirate. But I won't say more. Regan Doran, our speaker today, will tell you more about the French pirate Luis Aury, who raised the Mexican rebel flag. Regan has been involved with the museum since 2017. She began as an intern during her college years, and after graduation, she relocated to New York, but returned to Fernandina during the pandemic, working remotely as a publicist and volunteering at the museum on the weekends as a docent. Before we dive into Regan's story, I have a few announcements about upcoming events happening at the museum. Our next third event will be on July 19 with Jeff Suak, a professional writer and editor from Helium, Florida. He will be sharing with you the hidden history of Amelia Island, and we tell you about the odd and wonderful characters that fill the story of our island. Our next brand bag lunch will occur on August 7th. You will learn about the Seminole Wars with one of our great local speakers, Dave Roser. Now, please make sure to turn down your phone to respect our speaker and our other guests. And one more thing, bon appétit. Enjoy your lunch while listening to the adventures of Luis Aury with Regan.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you all about Amelia Island's 8 flag history and talk to you all about, it's gonna happen, it's gonna work. It's a great way to start. Amazing, marvelous. I'm really excited to talk to you all about Amelia Island's 8 flag history, particularly the 6th flag, the Mexican Rebel Army flag. Now, as mentioned, I'm a docent here at the museum. I give tours weekly, and honestly, this is probably like my favorite time to talk about during the tour. I was trained as a docent about 4 years ago, and at that time we would get this really massive docent manual to run through, and at this time we would call it the chaos period, which I don't know that they still call it that, but it is, really true to its name. This was a time of, as I mentioned, chaos, lawlessness, and defiance. The people I'll speak about claim to have done things they did in the name of, rebellion against the Spanish, or allegiance to the United States, or to support the South American independence movement. But in reality, they were really kind of chasing fortune and power in the most obvious way. Now, today I'm going to talk to you about pirates in general, because I thought this would be a really great time to just, take at least 10 minutes just to talk about pirates. I mean, I'm going to warn you, there's a point where it is about 100 years prior to our point in history that we'll be talking about today, but it'll be great. It'll be really informative. Now, I'll also talk about the laws of the land, why Amelia was ultimately so highly sought after for these pirates and privateers, and also talk about the actual story of the 6th flag. Now, again, before I get into the period of the 6th flag, which really kind of looks like a scene from Pirates of the Caribbean when they're in Tortuga, with all of the kind of heinous, acts and just drinking and, horrible things happening. I want to talk about pirates in general. There are many classifications and when they were most prevalent. So first of all, there were many classifications for the word pirate. You would have heard the words pirate, privateer, buccaneer, corsair thrown around in your average, history class. However, each word has its own meaning. So here's a quick explanation of each word. So first of all, we have pirate, which is a pretty blanket term. Covers anybody who committed the act of piracy, or the act of committing robbery on the high seas, a through and through criminal. We have a privateer, which I'm going to have to read because there's a lot of words. An armed private ship, which was licensed to attack enemy shipping. These were the people who were given letters of marque, which was a government license to attack or capture vessels of a nation at war with the issuer. To give you an idea of what this looks like, an example, I would like to chat about one privateer you might be familiar with, Sir Francis Drake. Now, for Sir Francis Drake was commissioned by Queen Elizabeth I in 1572. That there is Sir Francis Drake. He led an expedition against the Spanish colonies on the Pacific coast of America, which ultimately ended up leading him to be the second man to circumnavigate the globe, which, unintentional, but still cool. As tensions between England and Spain grew, the Queen actually gave Drake the command of 25 ships, where he sailed into the West Indies and the coast of Florida, where he mercilessly plundered Spanish ports, taking Santiago and the Cape Verdes Islands, Cartagena in Colombia, St. Augustine in Florida, and San Domingo in what is now known as the Dominican Republic. So, needless to say, he was quite the menace. He actually later on led a fleet of about 30 ships to the port of Cadiz, where he destroyed a number of vessels being readied for the Spanish Armada. These were just a few of the jobs that he performed as a privateer for the British Crown. Now, to go back to our little vocab lesson, buccaneers were pirates or privateers who operated in the bases in the West Indies and attacked Spanish ships in the Caribbean. And then we have corsairs, which were Muslim or Christian pirates active in the Mediterranean from the 16th to the 19th centuries. Now today we're mostly going to talk about the privateers and buccaneers as they're most relevant to our small island's history. But now, though we're going to speak of a time, this time that we're going to speak about, the 1800s, which happens in the early 1800s, does come with a good deal of swashbuckling outlaw stories. We're actually going to talk about, not actually, I do want to talk about what is known as the Golden Age of Piracy, which actually happened 100 years prior in the early 1700s. This was when robbery on the high seas was at an unprecedented level. At this time, this is actually the exact moment in history where when you're thinking of pirate and you think of all those Hollywood images of a pirate, what that is, it's talking about this time in history. So you have those pirate staples like the Jolly Roger, which is the skull and crossbones, and you have those famous pirates that you've all read about when you were kids or you tried to do more research projects for in high school. You have Captain Kidd, you have Blackbeard, and even you have Anne Bonny and Mary Read, who are also on the high seas. Now, I do want to clarify that the Golden Age of Piracy mainly talks about the goings-on of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. It doesn't necessarily look at the world as a whole. But around this time, there was, in fact, said to be at least more than 5,000 pirates on the seas at the time. Now, though historians disagree about the solid timeline of the Golden Age, some of them say it started in the mid-17th century, some say it's later, they can all generally agree about one of the peaks of the Golden Age, which comes from the end of the War of Spanish Succession. During this time is when a bunch of privateers and sailors lose their jobs and ultimately turn to pirating or piracy in the Caribbean, Indian Ocean, North American Eastern Seaboard, and West African coast in order to meet ends meet. Did I say that right? Make ends meet. Sorry. Now, as I mentioned before, around this time, the 1700s, early 1700s, or more specifically the 1720s, is where many of those key components that we're really familiar with when talking about pirates today come up. So chief among them was the Jolly Roger, as I mentioned before. The Jolly Roger was a flag that signaled a pirate ship to another ship on the horizon, likely a merchant ship, that they were coming and they were coming to cause trouble. Now, originally, prior to this emblem that was unique to each crew, a pirate would actually use a dual signal system. First, they would raise a black flag, which signaled to the merchant ship that they intended on taking all the cargo, and then they should, just give it up. They should just, cut their losses and just give up the cargo. When it was evident that the merchant ship wasn't just gonna, surrender, they would raise the red or bloody flag, which was notice to that merchant ship that, great, that's fine, we're now going to take it by force. Now, with this incredible peak of robbery on the high seas, countries started to clamp down on piracy, really putting, bounties on well-known pirates, making an example of them, displaying their bodies as a warning. Piracy was pushed to the fringes but did not disappear. There was always room for a moral flexibility that would lead them to the endeavors outside the law. Our sixth flag was planted well after the golden age of piracy, though these were not the famous pirates of the golden age. They were no less colorful, and their names are still known to us in history books. A few of them we'll be discussing today. Perfect. Now, again, before I talk about the sixth flag, I want to speak about how Amelia ended up being a port for these unsavory characters. There are two main reasons why Amelia ultimately became a hotbed for criminals, ne'er-do-wells, pirates, and privateers. The first being that the laws of the newly minted United States have a great effect on this general area, and also the ideal location of Amelia. So, with the creation of the United States comes a pretty tumultuous time for Amelia and Florida in general, as the new country figures out how to govern itself through trial and error. Its decisions end up creating a hotbed of outlawish activity here in Florida, but particularly Amelia Island. What I mean by this is 20 years after the Constitution is signed and Florida is gifted back to the Americans' allies, the Spanish, two significant laws are put into place that have a heavy effect on Amelia and completely alter the fabric of Amelia's demographic and economy. These two acts are the Non-Importation of Slaves Act and the Embargo Act. They completely prevent any international trade or any movement in or out of the United States, creating chaos, but also an opportunity for places like Amelia. This is just a picture of why it would be so advantageous for Amelia to suddenly become a port of ill repute. We are tucked right under Georgia. US, Spain, easy through. The east coast of Florida has many inlets that make it difficult to detect small boats, as you can see, because there are like 10 billion little rivers. And Amelia was one such place where these small boats would come and go unnoticed when sailing through the St. Mary's into Georgia. It became a prime location for vagabonds to smuggle their cargo and enslaved individuals into the United States, ignoring those aforementioned laws. Smuggling and pirating flourished in Amelia. At a given time, you would see about 300 ships at port. The Embargo Act ultimately was lightened up a bit, so instead of everybody not being able to trade with the US, now it was just Britain and France who couldn't. It was later on further lightened up too, but it really didn't change that Amelia was still a very, it was a prime location for bringing loot from these Spanish ships and continue to be illegal slave trade into the United States. Now, as the war in Europe, because of the war, there's actually several wars, due to the wars in Europe and the unwatched marauders, they threatened the safety of Florida. And so in 1811, James Madison holds a closed Congress, which is also another really favorite bit when I'm doing my tours. He holds a closed Congress and he passes a secret bill that states if, any foreign entity tries to disturb the peace, the US can take Florida for itself. Did anybody do, I guess it was 2 months ago, the fourth flag, the Patriots flag? Yeah, you saw that? So you're very well versed in basically what came of that. How this act led George Matthews, John McIntosh to attempt and take over Florida. Didn't really work. And after this failed attempt by the Patriots to take over Florida, which, as I mentioned, was talked about 2 months ago, the fabric of the area changed once again to a more chaotic place, but also now unsupervised. The country was occupied with people who had no regard for the revenue laws of the Spanish and the Americans. Each man was a quote-unquote law unto himself, a menace to society. With this setup in mind, understanding what Amelia and the surrounding area would have looked like, this is where we can start our Six Flag history. Perfect. Oh no. Okay. Okay, so first, I know y'all just had the MacGregor talk last month, but in order to talk about Aury, we're gonna have to talk about MacGregor again. So I'm gonna try to keep this brief, no promises, but maybe there's something new that wasn't shared last time. So first, MacGregor was an integral part of organizing the piracy and privateering here in Amelia Island, nurturing it as part of the economy. As a younger son of the Scottish nobility, Gregor MacGregor starts his journey in the British military, serving and gaining an interest in supporting the South American independence movement. He actually leaves home to go to Venezuela and fight alongside Simón Bolívar, where he quickly rises through the ranks. After just 5 years, Mr. MacGregor actually becomes a general in the Venezuelan army. Pardon me. However, the troops don't take too kindly to a foreigner coming in, cozying up to their fearless leader, and rising through the ranks with ease. And so MacGregor decides to move on and do bigger and better things, and where he decides to take his adventures over to Philadelphia with a new plan to support the South American independence movement. In Philly, he is commissioned by three South Americans to procure Florida for the U.S., which, I don't know, I feel like that's 3 dots too many. No, South Americans saying, go ahead and do this for the U.S. Don't worry about the U.S. actually saying, yeah, go ahead and do it, just do it without it, it's fine. It's fine. Anyway, his plan is to liberate East and West Florida from Spanish power and call for a due observance of the laws in the U.S. He figured that he was doing the U.S. a favor since the U.S. couldn't act on taking over Florida on its own without stirring issues and causing trouble with the Spanish, so it was a sort of gift for the U.S., right? With that said, just him operating in an American city was already violating U.S. neutrality laws, but he didn't mind that at all. From Philly to Baltimore to Charleston to Savannah, MacGregor raises money, men, and ships, and he prepares for his great insurgence of Florida. He gains support of a mercantile group where he promises to give 30,000 acres of land for $1, and they in turn will encourage, I think it's $1 per acre, but they encourage the mercantile firm encourages their friends and patrons to join MacGregor in his cause. Now, MacGregor had always planned on taking over Amelia first before moving on to the rest of Florida. He ultimately wanted to give Florida to the U.S., but not before using it as a depot to collect and organize supplies necessary to support the completion of South American independence. So from the border of Georgia and Florida, he moves on to Amelia Island with his 55 supporters, which originally had dwindled down from 150. He takes over the island with ease, with the help of a small rumor that was spread around town saying that his troops were actually 1,000 men strong. When he formally takes over Amelia Island, he hits the ground running. He lays claim to the island via a proclamation. He encourages residents to attach themselves to the United States. He hoists his green flag, which we were just put down. There we go. And he establishes a post office, as one does, orders a printing press, and he even issues his own currency. In our docent manual, apparently this was the first paper money in Florida, by the way. So he might have been, a little cuckoo, but he did some cool things for Florida. I won't go into the nitty-gritty of MacGregor's time here, which might seem like a lie, given that I'll give you all a lot of information about him, but it's fine. But there are a few elements that led to his downfall. The first being that he did not continue to move on to St. Augustine and use the rumors of his strength to his advantage. Instead, he waited in Amelia in vain for reinforcements. He continued the illegal slave trade in the United States, selling 31 individuals to support his failing government. This did not go unnoticed by the U.S. He charged an expensive tariff on cargo coming into the island, making it a less ideal port for privateers. And then ultimately, he continued to ignore the harassments of the residents in and around Amelia by his men, leaving a bad taste in the mouths of the locals, preventing any sort of desire or want to support MacGregor. Now, with all these missteps, MacGregor wasn't alone in ruling over Amelia. He had the help of two gentlemen, Jared Irwin and Ruggles Hubbard. To further build the economy, MacGregor entered into negotiations and commissioned privateers and buccaneers from the West Indies, intending to make Amelia a depot to collect and sell and disperse Spanish plunder from Spanish vessels. Jared Irwin, who was a former U.S. Congressman of Pennsylvania, was brought in and made president of the Admiralty so that he could help divvy up all the goods. However, as time went on, MacGregor continued to struggle to make good on the promises he made to Georgia investors. So, as a way to kind of combat that, he went towards private loans, and he actually made Jared Irwin the chief of Amelian Treasury so that he could issue notes negotiable upon the faith of the government, which ultimately, unsurprisingly, did nothing for MacGregor's credit. Now, as MacGregor's coffers dwindled and men became restless and started to abandon ship, he became stressed and concerned that there was no help in sight. However, word came along from the north saying that there was help and that Ruggles Hubbard was on the way. However, when Ruggles Hubbard arrives on August 28th, he actually doesn't come with any money, men, or munitions of war. The only purpose he had was to come to Amelia was to make sure that it stayed or was able to keep up as a rendezvous for privateers to come in and bring in their goods and smuggle them into the United States. Really having no interest in supporting the South American cause. After all these efforts to help obtain Florida for the U.S., from the U.S.'s perspective, MacGregor's involvement in Amelia was actually a hindrance. He was causing a bit of a stir, and it was all during a time where there were some preliminary discussions between the Spanish and the Americans on, what might come up about for Florida. As time went by, he continued to look for ways to keep Amelia. However, when he heard that the Spanish governor Coppinger had plans of removing him from Amelia, he decided to cut his losses and he leaves. He leaves on September 4th. Staying behind, Irwin was able to keep the Spanish at bay, who were interested in reclaiming the island, but not interested enough because he was able to maintain control of the island. Now, with this backstory, we can finally get to our main character of today's discussion, Luis Aury, who is this gentleman who, unfortunately, we only ever have one drawing of him. So, this is what we're stuck with. I'm sure he's not happy about it, but it's all good. So, Luis Aury was born in Paris, France in the late 1780s. Not much is known about his early life other than he joined the French Navy in his mid-teens, only to move on to privateering in Cartagena, in now Colombia, and support the South American endeavor for independence. There is a theme, yes. No. After several years of supporting the medical escapades of the South American rebellion, Aury found himself in Galveston, setting up a government with the permission of Minister Plenipotentiary, which was a new word for me and very hard to say, of Mexico to the U.S., Manuel de Herrera. Herrera appoints Aury as a civil and military governor with the power to issue letters of marque and institute a court of admiralty. Around this time, Aury becomes one of the most ferocious privateers, in the Gulf. No ship was safe unless accompanied by a convoy, and even then there were circumstances where Aury would still go ahead and take on the merchantmen and the convoy. Upon seizing the cargo and the enslaved peoples stowed on these ships, he would send them up and sell them in New Orleans. This lasted for a bit of time, long enough that his tyranny on the coast of Galveston actually ended up drying up his potential prey. So he ends up abandoning his government on April 5th, and around this time is when he receives word that MacGregor is looking to take over Florida, at least make sure that the Spanish don't have it anymore, and give it to the US. He figures that he'd go help him out, and if MacGregor, didn't have Amelia at the time, no worries, that he would just take it for himself. So he sets sail, and he arrives in Fernandina on September 17th, 2 weeks after MacGregor's departure. He comes to Amelia with 2 ships, $60,000, and 130 men, prepared to do what he needs to do to take over the island. There to welcome him are Jared Irwin and Ruggles Hubbard. They currently are in charge of the piratical economy, but are in a bit of a situation as they have no money to pay those vagabonds and supporters, and so they look to Aury for help. Aury offers a solution. He says, basically, absolutely, I'm so happy to help. All you have to do is make me chief of Amelia. They say, no, we're not going to do that. But we do need your money, so let's work this out. So with these new arrangements, Hubbard is made the civil governor, Aury the commander-in-chief of the military, and Irwin the adjutant general. Through this compromise, Aury claims the island is annexed to the Mexican Republic, and he raises our 6th flag, the Mexican rebel flag, or the Mexican flag. Now, this agreement doesn't last long, as Hubbard and Aury continue to butt heads. They are unable to agree on who has authority over the island. Unfortunately for Hubbard, he was already in poor health, and he was already in poor health, and Aury, who was already known for being pretty ruthless, took advantage of one particular night where Hubbard was particularly ill. He storms into his room with his men, threatens Hubbard, and forces Hubbard to give or surrender the authority to Aury. So Aury ends up becoming the supreme civil and military authority of Amelia. As Aury is making himself comfortable here on Amelia, he can't just rest, because 30 British ex-officers arrive intending to help their countryman MacGregor to support him in the movement for South American independence. However, much to their dismay, they get here, MacGregor is not, and they are only faced with Aury. Aury tries to smooth things out as much as possible. He holds a banquet, he wines and dines them, and he says, thank you for your service, thank you for coming. I don't actually need you. So I invite you to leave. Thank you for coming here. Go on your merry way. If you want to stay, you can, but I have more officers than I need, so you can be among the ranks in my garrison if you want. Uninterested in that, the disgruntled ex-officers decide to move on. They create a third party, and they go on to cause chaos on the island. Now, with the inclusion of this third party, Hubbard's supporters end up shifting and dwindling. So there were 2 main camps when Aury arrived: Hubbard's existing supporters, and then the 130 men who Aury brought along. Hubbard's supporters did not like Aury, so when Hubbard died, they were kind of at a loss for what to do. Some left, some stayed. A lot of hemming and hawing happened. And with these supporters without a leader, Aury takes advantage of the opportunity, combines his civil authority with his military supremacy, and he lines up the privateers under his commission along the coast of Fernandina, aims their guns at the island, and says, "We are under martial law for the next 10 days.
Wow.
He really knew how to strong arm them. Now, under the guise that these officers were, not truly supportive of the South American cause, Aury is able to kick out the members of Hubbard's party and then have these British soldiers arrested and brought to trial under court-martial. Ultimately, the martial law made it easier for Aury to rule Amelia with an iron fist, and for him to run the economy in Fernandina with more authority. He brings back activity into the Fernandina ports. Now, despite this power bid taking a huge chunk of his time, he does need to make sure that he makes time and has focus for his original efforts, which was to make this, piratical government and make Amelia a base for naval assaults on Spanish ships. He had his priorities in order. In the handful of months that Aury had control of Amelia, he was responsible for $500,000 worth of prizes, and he sent off more than 1,000 individuals to be sold into illegal slave trade. With this in mind, Aury still wanted to have the impression that Fernandina was a legitimate government. So he decides to hold an election. He figures that'll smooth everything over. However, up north, the U.S. is growing more and more concerned about Aury's actions, seeing that this establishment in Amelia is doing nothing to help take over Florida for the U.S. And so the president decides that it's time to break it up. So President Monroe remembers his predecessor's secret bill about, any foreign ruckus happening that is not keeping the peace. It is the U.S.'s right to take Florida for itself. So he invokes this secret act and expels Aury from Amelia. On December 22nd, 1817, a naval force under Captain J.D. Henley and an armament detachment under Major James Bankhead appeared off the coast. They inform Aury that they were under orders to take possession of the island. In turn, Aury denies that anything unlawful happened on the island and asks for a rebuttal to be sent to Monroe. I wish I could have put the rebuttal, it's just too long. I couldn't have read it to you all. He's a wordsmith. He really just took the blame completely off himself. I really encourage y'all to check it out. It's quite the piece of art. Unfortunately, the letter does not get to Monroe in an expedient manner, and the next day Bankhead goes ahead and takes over the island. Detained to answer for his actions on Amelia, Aury is unable to leave the island until about a month later, on January 24th, 1818. His next endeavors lead him to create similar establishments to Galveston and Amelia, but this time in Old Providence and St. Catalina in the Caribbean. Those aforementioned preliminary discussions that I mentioned were being disturbed by MacGregor actually become the Adams-Onis Treaty, which was signed on February 22nd, 1819, where Spain renounces East and West Florida, giving it to the U.S., and the U.S. renounces Texas. With that, we've reached our 7th flag, which I hope you all come back next month to discuss. So, or actually, I guess it's in 2 months. Because next month is the Seminole Wars. But thank you all. I hope you enjoyed it. I know that was only 30 minutes, but thank you. If you have questions, I'll do my best to answer them, but no promises. Yes?
What sort of research did you have to do outside of the manual?
So, it's funny, there are, when you look up Luis Aury, nothing comes up. When you look up Gregor MacGregor, everything comes up. And because of the nature of how Amelia was taken over, it is a natural just relationship between the two, and there are automatically going to be things about Aury in those documents. But ultimately, there was a bunch of historical texts or texts written by very, very old historians. There's one text I read that was from 100 years ago, and it was funny because not much has changed between that text and our docent manual, which I don't know how low that docent manual is, but and then there's one from like 1966, which was much briefer and easier to read because it wasn't in early 1900s English. But yes, yeah.
What was your favorite thing that you learned while researching this?
Okay, so when MacGregor is trying his darndest to keep hold of Amelia, the history text that I read that was from a historian from 100 years ago, he was quite sassy, and he had a point in the text where he's talking about how MacGregor, Irwin, Hubbard were all discussing about ways to keep the island away from the Spanish hands, and the historian says, as you can imagine, it was a pathetic sight to behold. Just to think that somebody said, okay, yeah, go ahead, publish. So that was genuinely my favorite part. Overall, it's a very interesting history, and so each new thing that I learned is great.
How do you spell Aury's name?
Aury. Now, his first name I've seen spelled two ways, Luis or Louis, so up to the reader's discretion. Yeah.
Just to comment on that, I think the Louis relates to his birth in France, and then he made it more Spanish.
Oh, okay.
So he made that change. That's my understanding.
Okay, cool.
I read quite a few years ago that he was illiterate. Do you have any report on that? 'Cause he had other people write stuff.
It's possible, absolutely possible. I didn't see anything about that.
I don't know that that's true or not. I heard it or read it somewhere.
But I didn't see anything about it. From what I understood, not to say that somebody didn't write it for him, though a lot of the time when there was a proclamation, it would say it was written by Luis Aury, and if it wasn't written by him, it would say written by so and so, but under the request of Luis Aury. But if he was illiterate, he was still a wordsmith. He knew how to really write a note. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
We've all seen this picture before. Where did this come from? It looks like it was done by a school child.
So I don't know where, but I do know it's when he was a child. It's supposed to be. I think it's supposed to be when he enters the Navy, and I guess at that point is when they documented their sailors or something. But it's when he was very young. Unflattering, but very young. Yes.
Dr. Schaefer indicated that he was on Cedar Point. Have you ever database on that?
I did see that, yes. I think they were stationed at Cedar Point for a second before.
But that was not Amelia Island, but that was another port for him to watch people come and go. I know what you're saying.
Yeah. I've seen that name in there, and I do know that he was there, yes. But aside from that, that is all I found.
Could you repeat that, please?
He was asking if he was ever at Cedar Point Port, and to watch the ebb and flow of people coming in. Yeah.
Do you know how the printing press was used differently by Gregor MacGregor versus Luis Aury?
That's a good question. I don't know. I do just know that he did use the printing press for his proclamations, and actually, I think he brought in a newspaper. I think he brought in a newspaper to be a little more effective with sharing the news versus MacGregor's just, again, proclamations and village criers. Yeah.
Is there any identity to the British people that came? Have you ever researched the British people that came to Amelia?
Oh, the ex-officers?
Yes.
No, I haven't looked into individual. Actually, there's one gentleman. His last name was MacDonald, and he was kind of responsible for hurting the ex-officers and trying to cause a ruckus. But aside from him, I personally haven't looked into those gentlemen who were here on Amelia. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about the black soldiers Aury had and how the existing residents here felt about that?
Yes, so when he arrived in Amelia, he came with 130 Haitians, which when he arrives, it was the slave owners in Georgia and the surrounding area were very shocked and kind of scared. They weren't sure about what was going to happen. as they had heard about the the rebellion or the revolts happening in Haiti, which was around that time. But ultimately, kind of the biggest divide was between Aury's Haitians and Hubbard's people. Hubbard's people were mainly white folk who were British, American, French, what have you, and there was just automatically tension between the two groups, and so that kind of really heated the tension between Hubbard and Aury, but ultimately Aury, he didn't kill Hubbard, but he definitely scared him to death. So a couple days after he ran into his room, said basically, "Give me your authority." Hubbard himself, I think, only died like 5 days later. So, yeah.
He had descendants.
Aury?
The Hubbard family, which is a Hubbard out of the Okefenokee Swamp.
You know, okay. So when I was looking for him, Hubbard, I could not find a single picture. But I did see the plaque of Hubbard's, I guess, territory up in Georgia.
The Hubbards were the one that developed harvest the Okefenokee Swamp. That's what I'm trying to say.
Oh, I see. Okay. No, I don't know anything about the descendants, but yeah, that's very cool though.
Let me give you a question.
Yeah.
During this time frame, Mexico keeps the name Mexico, the country, presumably was no longer Spanish at the time. They had already gotten their independence. I guess that's true at the time. Did Mexico actually have anything to do with Amelia Island, in fact?
So the focus wasn't necessarily, okay, so the reason why Mexico is involved is because Mexico, not actually Mexico, Manuel de Herrera, who is an ambassador of Mexico to the US, commissioned Aury to be a privateer in Galveston. When Aury bleeds Galveston dry of any of his prey, he moves on to go help MacGregor in Florida, here in Amelia. And along the way, he continues to have his Mexican flag so that, it's a protection. It's better to be a privateer than a pirate. You are less likely to get in trouble, maybe be hanged. I don't know that they were doing that at this time, but it was definitely, I don't know that there was that same display as earlier, but the main reason why Mexico was involved was Aury, because he was just an attachment as a privateer.
So there was no actual involvement of the Mexican government?
It was, South America was most concerned about Florida versus Mexico. That's why, so the three, when I mentioned that, and I know this has nothing to do with Aury, but MacGregor was commissioned by 3 South Americans. They were from New Granada, Venezuela, and then one more place. Like, they were all just more concerned as South America to get their independence than Mexico was already doing pretty okay. I don't know. Doing okay is, I guess, relative. But they were doing their work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is that it? All right. Well, if that's it, thank you all. I really appreciate it.